The Westmore Club lay drowned in a haze of dim golden light, cast by chandeliers whose crystal arms had long since yellowed with age. Tobacco smoke curled thickly through the air, clinging to the velvet drapes and darkened ceiling, pressing down upon the room with suffocating weight. Laughter too coarse for gentlemen, the clink of coins against scarred oak. The whisper of shuffled cards all merged into a discordant symphony of decline. At the center of the hall slumped Lord Edmund Hale, his collar undone. Breath sour with brandy so pungent that even his servant lingered at a distance, lest he retch. Once he had been a polished nobleman, heir to the proud Hale estate of Rosevale, famed for its sweeping lavender fields. But beneath the jaundiced glow of the chandeliers, Edmund was nothing more than a ruin of himself, eyes bloodshot, cheeks puffed from sleepless nights at the gaming tables. His family's silver signet long pawned away. Across from him sat Damien Ravenscroft, Marquis of Ravenskeep, his back erect, the black folds of his cloak falling in sharp lines over broad shoulders. Candlelight glinted against hair, dark as jet, and a face chiseled into perpetual sternness. Society called him the Stone Marquis, for never had his expression betrayed mercy. For years he had haunted the aristocracy as a predator, swallowing bankrupt estates whole, turning the debts of others into his own cold advantage. One more round, Edmund slurred, fingers trembling as they clutched at the deck. Damien lifted his brandy, one brow arched, voice low and metallic. "What do you have left to stake, Lord Hale? Rosevale passed into my hands 3 months past. Your debts rise higher than the cliffs of Dover. Even the late lady's paintings I already hold the receipts for those." The table fell silent. Gentlemen craned their necks, savoring the humiliation like vultures circling carrion. Edmund gave a rasping laugh, a madman's laugh. His cards hit the table as his fevered eyes gleamed with desperate inspiration. "I still possess what is most valuable. My daughter, Seraphina." The air froze. A sharp intake of breath cut the silence. A few cards slipped from unsteady fingers. Damien set his glass down with a dry crack. His steel-gray gaze locked onto Edmund. "What did you just say?" "Seraphina Hale," Edmund rasped, his words squeezing through clenched teeth. "She is clever, well-bred, beautiful enough to rival any debutante in London. She shall remain at Ravenskeep for 30 days 30 nights in exchange for my debts forgiven." No one dared move. Candlelight drew the hard planes of the Marquess's jaw in stark relief. Many expected him to rise in disgust. Instead, he sat unmoving, a silence heavier than thunder gathering around him. At last his voice came, low and cutting as a blade unsheathed. "You disgust me, Edmund. To gamble away your own flesh and blood as though she were merchandise." A murmur rippled through the room. Yet Edmund, drunk and ruined, only nodded, mistaking cruelty for compassion. "Call me vile, if you wish. But the girl, she is Rosevale's final chance. Without her, our name is lost forever." Damien leaned back, his eyes colder than the night wind battering the windows. He gave a sharp gesture. "Deal." The chamber stirred in shocked commotion. Chairs scraped, whispers swarmed. The dealer, pale with dread, dealt the cards with quivering hands. Edmund lifted his hand, fingers shaking so violently, sweat streaked his temples. His cracked lips stretched into a manic grin. 3 of a kind. He slammed them down, triumphant. 3 aces. "I've won." "Do you hear m'I've won?" Breathless silence. He lurched to his feet, clutching at hope like a drowning man. Damien moved at last. Slowly, he laid down for queens. The room erupted, gasping, jeering laughter crashing like waves. Edmund collapsed back into his chair, rigid with despair. His glass slipped from numb fingers, spilling brandy across the floorboards in a crimson-brown pool like blood. Damien rose. His towering figure cast shadow over the fallen lord. His voice tolled like a funeral bell. "In 3 days I will come to Rosevale. Seraphina Hale will belong to Ravenskeep for 30 nights. At the end, your debts are gone. Refuse me." His eyes flashed like drawn steel, "and prison will claim you instead," he signaled. His steward tossed a leather pouch upon the table. The jangle of gold coins rang mercilessly through the chamber. "A deposit for your merchandise." A groan escaped Edmund's ruined throat, but protest never found strength. Damien adjusted his gloves and strode out. The door shut behind him with grim finality, leaving only the wreck of a man collapsed amidst his spilled drink. That night, within the echoing halls of Rosevale, Seraphina stood before the tall windows, gazing upon lavender gardens long since withered to brown stalks. In her hand shook a letter penned by her father, ink blurred by brandy stains. "Seraphina, you must understand. This is the only way I have saved you. Save the family." Her fingers trembled not from fear but from fury, humiliation, and a pride that burned silent and fierce. She knew there was no escape. In 3 days' time, the stone marquise would arrive, and she would be taken into the shadowed fortress of Ravenskeep. She closed her eyes, whispering into the darkness, "I may be bargained away, but I will not be broken. 30 nights and I shall return, whole, unbowed." Thunder rolled beyond the windows, echoing the vow that clenched within her heart. 3 days after the shameful wager, Rosevale lay swallowed in a pall of gray mist. The estate once hailed as the jewel of the Lavender Valley was now but a hollow shell of past glory. Long galleries once adorned with paintings now gaped with bare, scarred walls where frames had been sold off. In the drawing room, the proud Turkish carpet that had been Lady Hale's treasure lay threadbare, its faded colors stained with spilled drink. Seraphina stood tall in the emptiness, a small valise resting at her feet. She had chosen a handful of simple gowns, an old woolen cloak, and a wooden box containing her dearest books, along with the sheet music her mother had left behind. What few trinkets remained she left in their chest. They meant nothing, their worth long since squandered by her father. The heavy oak door creaked. Lord Edmund Hall stumbled in cloak, crumpled, eyes bloodshot, gait unsteady. He looked less like a man and more like a ghost haunting the ruins of his own house. "Seraphina," his voice rasped, "you must understand me. This was the only way." She did not turn. Her gaze remained fixed on the window where the lavender fields lay abandoned and withered. When she spoke, her tone was cold as winter's wind. "Your only way was to sell your daughter." Edmund staggered closer, hands trembling as though in prayer. "I had nothing left. Without this, Rosevale would be seized, our name erased. But the Marquis of Ravenscroft, he swore it, is only 30 days, and then you return. The debt's gone. All will be well again." At that, she turned, eyes of storm gray, blazing with fury and disdain. "Well, you call turning me into a bargaining chip? Well?" Words caught in his throat. His gaze dropped, his frame shaking with shame and drink. In that instant, Seraphina saw no trace of the man who had once lifted her onto horseback, who had read Shakespeare with her beneath the oaks. Before her stood only a broken drunkard, weak and selfish. She bent, lifted her valise. "Do not fear, father. I will go. There is no choice left to me. But remember this, when I return, it will not be because of you. It will be because of me." With that, she walked the echoing corridor once alive with her mother's laughter during grand soirees. Now only her footsteps rang, stark and solitary. By late afternoon, a black carriage bearing the silver raven crest of Ravenscroft rolled to a halt before Rosevale's gates. The driver, cloaked thickly and half-masked with a scarf, bowed curtly as he took her meager luggage. Seraphina lingered a moment, eyes sweeping her childhood home one final time. The wilted lavender shrubs, the rose trellis stripped bare, the chapel bell tower leaning in decay. Her whole girlhood lay bound within that sight, a girlhood already dissolved like morning mist. "Miss Hale, we must depart," a Ravenscroft retainer urged, his tone as dry as dust. She lifted her chin and stepped into the carriage. The heavy door slammed, sealing her from the past. As the wheels rattled over gravel, she did not look back. There was nothing left worth seeing. The road to Ravenskeep stretched endlessly, threading through forests thick and valleys drowned in fog. The sky was iron, clouds like a heavy shroud smothering daylight. Wind hissed through the cracks, tossing loose strands of her dark hair across her face. Through the long journey, Seraphina sat silent, her heartbeat drumming a rhythm of anger, dread, and a quiet resolve. She was no commodity, and if Ravenscroft imagined he could break her within 30 nights, he would learn otherwise. Her fingers rested upon a small book in her lap, her mother's journal. On the worn cover, the inked words still read, "Pride is your armor." The phrase stiffened her spine. Night had fallen when the carriage crested the final hill. Ravenskeep loomed ahead, perched upon a cliff face, its spires stabbing through the storm clouds. Blackened stone walls streaked with moss rose high, windows like narrow, watchful eyes. A fierce wind surged, laced with the salt of the sea and the damp of mountain stone. Seraphina shivered but betrayed nothing. She sat erect, gaze unflinching. The carriage clattered beneath the iron gates. Their hinges shrieked like a warning. In the courtyard, servants stood in grim rows, torchlight stretching shadows up the towering walls, casting the place into the likeness of an ancient prison. A footman opened the door. Seraphina stepped down, shoes pressing against wet gravel. Cold wind whipped tears from her eyes, yet her chin lifted as she faced the fortress, the place that would hold her for 30 nights. "Welcome to Ravenskeep, Miss Hale," came the even voice of Mrs. Rowan, the gray-haired housekeeper. "The Marquise awaits you in the great hall." Seraphina drew a deep breath and moved forward. Within her pulsed the vow unspoken, "They may call me a wager, but here I will prove myself human, not merchandise." And with that step, she left Rosevale behind, entering the shadowed domain of the Stone Marquise. The great doors of Ravenskeep groaned open, their rusted hinges shrieking like the echo of old ghosts. Seraphina crossed the threshold, a breath of chill sweeping from the cavernous hall to slip beneath the folds of her modest gray-blue gown. The vast space swallowed her steps, each footfall reverberating beneath the vaulted ceiling, mingling with the moan of wind winding through the towers. Torches sputtered along the stone walls, casting sickly pools of gold and leaving whole stretches. Drowned in shadow at the far end of the hall stood Damien Ravenscroft, tall and still beneath his black cloak. He might have been carved from granite, proud, immovable, severe. Firelight flickered across the hard planes of his face, striking sparks in eyes of steel that seemed to glow against the dark. Seraphina advanced, small valise in hand. Her heart thundered, yet her stride was steady. When she drew near, Damien inclined his head, his voice low and resonant. "Miss Hale, I trust your father has explained." She lifted her chin. "He said he lost his daughter in a game of cards. And you bought hares, one buys a horse." A flicker of surprise crossed Damien's face, swiftly veiled by composure. "I did not bargain for flesh, if that is your fear. For 30 nights you will remain at Ravenskeep. Dine with me. Speak with me when I command it. After that you may return to Rosevale, and your father's debts are no more." Her fingers clenched the handle of her case, lips curving in a blade-sharp smile. How noble! A commodity permitted to keep its wrappings intact. How generous of you, my lord! The air grew heavy. Housekeeper Rowan and the nearby servants bent their heads, feigning tasks. Damien, instead of anger, studied her a long moment. In the fire's glow, his expression was as iron, yet edged with something unspoken. "You are not what I expected," he murmured. "And you are exactly what I expected," Serafina returned coolly. A nobleman too cold to see people as anything but pieces in his game of power. Damien offered no reply. A gesture summoned Mrs. Rowan. "This way, Miss. The East Wing chamber is prepared." Serafina gave the Marquis a curt, proper bow, graceful yet unyielding, then turned on her heel. The corridor stretched endlessly, moonlight slanting through narrow windows, silvering the portraits that lined the walls. Ravenscroft ancestors stared down men armored. Women corseted all, with eyes as chill as the stone itself. "This castle," Serafina murmured, "feels more fortress than home." Rowan's gaze flicked toward her. Ravenskeep was built for war. It has never been warm. Since her ladyship's passing, it has grown colder still. Serafina faltered. "Her ladyship." "The late Marchioness," Rowan replied, her aged eyes guarded. "Do not speak of it to him." "They say her death left a shadow on these walls." Serafina said nothing. She had heard whispers, the beautiful wife, dead from a suspicious riding accident. Some dared suggest Damien's hand in it. Yet when she recalled his imposing figure, she sensed more than stone in his stare. There lurked an abyss. The blue room opened before her, richly adorned, yet lifeless. Dark damask on the walls, a four-poster bed draped in heavy curtains, velvet thick enough to smother moonlight. A weak fire sputtered in the grate, giving meager warmth. "This will be your chamber," Rowan said. "Dinner is at 8. He does not tolerate tardiness." When the door closed, Serafina was alone. She set her valise upon the table and unpacked. A few neutral gowns, a worn shawl, her mother's journal, a quill. All that she owned paltry, yet priceless. She drifted to the window, drew back the curtain. The castle clung to its cliff, the sea crashing far below. Wind howled around the spires, and the sky was a swath of black, pierced only by a thin silver moon. 30 nights, she whispered. 30 nights in this prison of stone. At 7:45, a young maid named Ela arrived with her supper gown. With gentle hands, she dressed Serafina, tied her hair, fixed a black ribbon at her throat. The girl spoke little, but kindness glimmered in her eyes. "How long have you served here?" Serafina asked softly. "For years," Miss Ela answered. "The Marquis is stern, but just." "He is not, as the rumors say." Serafina studied her reflection. Dark hair arranged in loose curls, a face left bare of artifice, eyes proud as ever. She inhaled deeply. "Then I shall see for myself." The dining hall stretched vast as a cathedral. A walnut table fit for 30 bore only 2 places. Candle flames wavered in silver holders, their glow flickering high upon the arched ceiling but failing to banish the gloom. Damien waited at the head. When Serafina entered, he rose and inclined his head. "Miss Hale." She dipped a controlled curtsy and took her seat opposite. Between them yawned a distance as wide as worlds. The meal began. Cutlery clicked against porcelain, each sound magnified in the silence. Words were few, polite, brittle. Yet whenever she raised her eyes, she found his already upon her cold, but not empty. Something lay beneath. At last he set down his glass, voice steady. "You are nothing like your father." Her gaze lifted, calm, resolute. "I pray every day that I never shall be." His lips curved at quite a smile, more a fleeting concession. "Perhaps that is the very thing that will keep you alive here." And in that instant, with candlelight trembling against the encroaching dark, Serafina understood, Ravenskeep would not merely test her endurance. It would be a contest of wills between a woman forced to the edge and a man who had walled himself in stone, and she swore to herself, "I will not be the one who breaks." Her first day at Ravenskeep dragged on, heavy as the clouds blanketing the sky. Seraphina spent much of the morning in the blue room, opening her mother's journal, scribbling a few lines to steady her mind against the weight of silence. By afternoon, she ventured down the endless corridors, studying dust-laden carpets and rusting suits of armor that stood like sentinels of a forgotten age. The servants scarcely met her eye. They bowed swiftly, then vanished into shadows, as though she were no more than a passing phantom object on loan. Destined to disappear after 30 nights, on the third night the sky finally broke. A storm rolled in from the sea, rain lashing the castle walls like a scourge. Wind screaming around the towers, thunder cleaving the dark in two. In Seraphine's chamber, the windows rattled. The curtains billowed like sails, and the cold gnawed her skin, unable to endure it. She wrapped herself in a thin cloak, took up a trembling oil lamp, and slipped into the hall. Its flickering glow revealed slick stone walls, the moaning wind seeping through every seam as if the castle whispered curses of its own. Down the spiral stair she went, her pulse quickening with every gust. Then came the sound of doors slamming open, followed by footsteps, heavy and sure. From the darkness emerged a tall figure, cloak soaked through, raven hair plastered to his brow. Damien Ravenscroft. He halted when he saw her, steel-gray eyes catching the lamplight. "Miss Hale. Wandering at this hour?" Seraphina steadied her lamp, keeping her composure. My chamber shook as if the walls would give way. I could not sleep. Better to seek refuge below. Damien shed his drenched cloak, rain dripping onto the stone floor. He moved to the hearth, poured himself a measure of brandy from a crystal decanter. After a moment, he turned, voice hoarse yet even. "Will you take a glass?" She hesitated, then nodded. The warm liquor in her hand carried a sharp fragrance, blotting out the must of the old hall. They sat opposite one another, firelight flickering between them, the storm raging against the windows. Silence stretched, filled only by the relentless drum of rain. At last, unable to bear it, Seraphina asked, "What business takes you out in such weather?" Damien leaned back, eyes shadowed. A cottage in the village collapsed. I went to see to it. The family will shelter in the granary until repairs are made. Her brow arched. "You went yourself." His glance flicked sharp across her face. "A Marcus's duty is to see his people safe." She sipped the brandy, unsettled. The man before her was not merely the cold master of rumor, but one who bore a burden no one else seemed to know. A flash of lightning illuminated his features, and she saw the fatigue etched deep around his eyes. The brandy loosened the line of his shoulders. His voice, when it came, lacked its usual edge of steel. "Miss Hale," he said quietly, "do you know what they call me?" She nodded. "The Stone Marquis, cold, ruthless, unfeeling." The corner of his mouth twitched, but it was no smile. "That name has clung to me since the day Eleanor died." Seraphine's gaze sharpened. "Eleanor the For a long moment he said nothing. The fire threw his shadow high, twisting it across the wall like a tormented spirit. At last he exhaled, his voice nearly swallowed by the storm. "I loved her, completely, blindly, but she betrayed me with my closest friend. I found them together in my own chamber, in this very castle." A chill ran down Seraphine's spine. "And what happened after?" His grip tightened around the glass until his knuckles blanched. 3 days later, she fell from her horse and died. They say I arranged it, that I murdered her in vengeance. The room fell silent, save for the crackle of the fire. "Did you?" Seraphine's voice was steady, though soft. Damien's head snapped up, eyes blazing like tempered steel. "No, For all her treachery, I could not. He drew a harsh breath. But I let them believe it. Easier, perhaps, to be the villain they expected than the fool they would scorn, the man left, broken by his wife's betrayal. Serafina studied him. For the first time, she saw cracks in the armor. Beneath the marble mask lay a man who had once loved, once trusted, and been undone. She set her glass aside, her voice almost a whisper. Perhaps you are not stone. Perhaps you are only buried alive in it. Something flickered in his gaze, a depth that stirred against her words. Then, abruptly, he rose, as if afraid of what he had revealed. It is late. You should return to your chamber. She inclined her head, drew her cloak tighter. As she passed him, warmth brushed her hand knot from the fire. But from the man still shackled to his grief. Back in the blue room, Serafina lay wakeful, the storm raging outside, but her thoughts more turbulent still. Damien Ravenscroft, the man who held her under a shameful bargain, now appeared as something else, wounded, solitary, lost. She closed her eyes, recalling the look in his face when he spoke of Eleanor. In that moment, he had not been the stone marquise, but only a man abandoned in the ruins of his own heart. And she wondered, would 30 nights at Ravenskeep prove a prison, or a journey into wounds that had never healed? The storm had passed. By morning, a pale sun slipped through the heavy clouds, its light draping Ravenskeep in a thin silver haze. Mist clung to the gray battlements so that the castle seemed at once a forsaken fortress and a solitary isle, cut off from the world. Serafina woke late, her sleep restless with echoes of Damien's confessions from the storm. She wrapped herself in a thin woolen cloak and went to the window. From there she saw the castle gardens, once carefully designed, now left to ruin. Roses ran wild, heather sprawled over paths, and flagstones vanished beneath weeds. A strange longing stirred within her. At Rosevale, her mother's gardens had been radiant, and as a child she had raced through lavender walks, hands dusted with golden pollen. A garden was never mere decoration to her, but a place where memory and love lived, where life itself breathed. She decided she must go down, after a breakfast of silence. Serafina asked an old gardener for pruning shears. He stared, incredulous that a lady would soil her hands with such work. But she smiled and insisted until he relented. The garden met her like a battlefield grass to her knees. Rose thorns snarled. She chose an ancient rosebush against the wall and made the first cut. The sharp snap of metal brought with it a peculiar release. With each branch trimmed, sweat broke upon her skin, mingling the scent of damp earth with the faint perfume of dying blooms. Time fled. By noon, sunlight filtered weakly down onto neatened shrubs and cleared paths. Her hands were scratched, her cloak stained, yet peace filled her chest. For the first time since arriving at Ravenskeep, she felt she commanded something of her own. When she paused to wipe her brow, a weight of gaze pressed upon her. She glanced upward. In the library window above stood Damien Ravenscroft, tall against the gloom. His gray eyes followed her, unreadable, pensive. Serafina did not look away, nor did she bow. She simply turned back to her work, as if his presence meant nothing. But her heart beat faster, for she knew he was watching. In the days that followed, gardening became her ritual. Each morning she ventured out, pruning, pulling, reclaiming forgotten paths. And each day the grounds yielded new secrets. A broken-winged angel statue buried in moss, a stone bench drowned in ivy, a dry fountain whispering of water long gone. The servants began to look at her differently. Isla, the young maid, would slip her gloves or a fresh cloth. Even the old gardeners nodded in respect, murmuring that perhaps the castle was breathing again at last. Serafina knew her work was small, yet every flower freed from weeds felt like a piece of her own soul awakened. One noon, while clearing a tangle of briars, she heard footsteps. Turning, she found Damien standing there. Weak sunlight broke through clouds, stretching his tall form long across the ground. "How long have you been at this?" His voice was low, even she wiped her forehead, calm. "Several days. I cannot sit idle in a dark room for 30 nights. His eyes swept the newly trimmed roses. "My mother loved this garden. She called it the soul of Ravenskeep. But Eleanor," his lips tightened. "Eleanor thought it a burden. She despised the sun, the soil upon her hands." Seraphina studied him, noting how his eyes briefly softened, then shuddered again. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "you've never had someone who could see the beauty here." Damien turned toward her. In that cold air, a flicker crossed his gaze. No trust. Not yet, but no pure suspicion either. Something fragile stirred Dot. Later that afternoon, Seraphina uncovered a stone bench smothered in ivy. She sat, removing her gloves, her hands raw with scratches. Damien approached, eyes falling to her wounds. "You should leave this to the gardeners," he murmured, "and let the beauty die." Her reply was soft yet firm. "No, my lord. A garden needs tending as the soul does. Neglected, it withers." He said nothing. His hand half lifted as though to touch her scarred skin, then froze in the air. He withdrew, shadows deepening in his eyes. "You truly are unlike any woman I have known." Seraphina gave a faint smile. "Then perhaps you should begin to see me as I am rather than as a debt repaid." With that, she rose and walked away, leaving him motionless amid the overgrowth. That night, seated at her window, she looked out upon the garden. Its paths a little clearer, its form a little freer. And she felt it keenly that she was not merely reviving earth, but prying open a crack in the walls around Damien Ravenscroft's heart. Perhaps the garden's awakening was only the beginning of deeper change she dared not yet name. A week after the storm, Ravenskeep no longer felt as barren as on the day Seraphina first arrived. No one spoke of it openly, yet the servants' eyes had changed, less curious, more respectful. The garden, once nothing but weeds, now showed paths uncovered, roses daring to bud again. Even Mrs. Rowan, ever stern, had been seen to incline her head slightly when she passed Seraphina among the hedges. That afternoon, dirt still clinging to her hands from the garden, Isla approached shyly. "Miss Hale, the Marquis requests your presence in the music room this evening." Seraphine's brows knit. The music room, the one Mrs. Rowan had told her had been sealed since the Marchioness's death. "He asks for me." "For what purpose?" Isla only bowed. He did not say. "Only that you should be prepared after supper." Seraphina pressed her lips together. Inside her rose a tangle of feelings, curiosity, unease. And though she tried to deny it a trace of anticipation, the music room lay in the western wing. Candlelight flickered across vaulted ceilings and tapestries woven with scenes of myth. In the center stood a pianoforte, long cloaked beneath a sheet. Damien Ravenscroft waited near the window, his stance straight, hands clasped behind his back. When she entered, he inclined his head. "Thank you for coming, Miss Hale. What do you wish of me here?" she asked, her voice cool, measured. He crossed to the pianoforte, drew away the cloth. Dust rose in a shimmering veil. "I was told your mother taught you music. You play." She hesitated. "A little. But it has been long since I touched the keys." His hand rested lightly on the instrument, his gaze softened, almost wistful. "Would you play for me?" Ravenskeep has known no music in too many years. Seraphina searched his face for command, but found only expectation. At last she nodded. She sat, fingers trembling as they touched the cool ivory. Drawing a steady breath, she began a simple nocturne, her mother's favorite. The first notes came hesitant, then grew smoother, flowing through the chamber, stirring the sleeping stones. Damien watched, unmoving, his eyes fixed on her profile, bathed in candlelight. Each note seemed to fracture the silence of Ravenskeep, carrying warmth into walls that had long forgotten it. When the final chord faded, silence pressed close again. Only the storm's distant echo and their breathing remained. Serafina kept her head bowed, her pulse wild. His voice came, quiet yet clear. My mother believed music revealed a soul's truth. If she was right, you have just proved what I suspected. Her eyes lifted, sharp. And what suspicion is that, my lord? He stepped nearer, standing beside the bench. That you are not a pawn of your father's making. You are far stronger than he ever imagined. Her breath caught, not sure if from his words or from the nearness of him. Damien leaned closer, his gaze fastened to her face. The severity was gone. Only a torment remained. I should not want this, he whispered, as if to himself. What is it you want? Seraphine's voice wavered, though her eyes held steady. You? The confession hung, dangerous and intoxicating as brandy. Serafina should have recoiled, should have reminded herself of the degrading bargain that bound her here. Yet she remained, heart hammering, until it seemed it would break free. His hand lifted, halted, then, trembling with restraint, touched her cheek. The gentlest brush, fleeting, yet enough to steal her breath. His lips found hers, tentative, asking rather than taking. A slow, hesitant kiss, one she could have refused, yet did not. Instead, she answered it just enough to feel the warmth rushing through her veins. When Damien pulled back, both were breathless. His eyes burned with equal parts horror and hunger. "Forgive me," he rasped. "This must not happen again." Serafina steadied herself, though her pulse roared. "You call it a mistake. I am not certain I would." He turned abruptly, striding to the door, as if fearing that another moment would undo all his control. Silence returned to the vast chamber. Serafina sat before the pianoforte, fingers still resting upon ivory keys. She trembled, yet a strange light shone in her eyes. That kiss, brief, forbidden, had altered everything. It did not erase the truth that she had been wagered like coin, but it proved another truth within these stone walls. Beneath wounds long hidden, a spark had caught, a spark neither she nor Damien dared admit, neither could deny. The next day, Ravenskeep stirred with an uncharacteristic bustle. From early morning, the servants swept and polished. Brass candlesticks gleamed. Golden embroidered drapes were hung in the great hall. Even the dining chamber, usually dim and spare, bloomed with fresh flowers and crisp linen. From her window in the blue room, Serafina watched uneasily. No one needed to tell her, someone of importance was expected. By afternoon, the ring of hooves echoed through the courtyard. From a lacquered black carriage stepped a young woman in a gown of shimmering teal silk. Her cloak trimmed in sable, jeweled gloves glinting at her wrists. Curls of golden hair cascaded over a face too perfect, too proud. She was Lady Celestine Marbury only, daughter of the Earl of Westhaven, celebrated across London for her beauty and her lineage. When Serafina was summoned to supper, the scene was transformed. Where once two places sufficed at the long table, now a third had been set beside Damien Ravenscroft. Lady Celestine sat there, radiant, her hand brushing the Marquis's sleeve as she laughed. For once, Damien's manner held a polish Serafina rarely witnessed, courteous, attentive, almost warm. "Ah, here she is," he said as Serafina entered. "Miss, allow me to present Lady Celestine Marbury, an old friend of the family." Celestine's sapphire eyes flicked over Serafina, smile unfaltering though edged with disdain. "How delightful to meet you, Miss Hale. I had heard the Marquise was hosting a most unusual guest." Now I see what he meant. Serafina inclined her head, lips pressed tight. "The honor is mine, Lady Celestine." Dinner was a strained performance. Celestine chattered ceaselessly of London balls, of noble intrigues, of teasing anecdotes laced with barbed wit. Damien listened, sometimes smiling, answering briefly. Serafina sat opposite, silent, cutting food she scarcely tasted. Each glance showed Celestine's hand resting on Damien's arm. Each laugh pitched to fill the chamber. The Marquise once told me, Celestine trilled, that the gardens here could be precious if only someone cared for them. But I never thought he would find anyone willing to soil her hands with earth. Serafina laid down her knife and fork, eyes steady. Often the greatest beauty lies beneath the dirt, Lady Celestine. Not everyone has the sight to recognize it. A hush fell. Celestine's smile tightened, her eyes flashing. Damien's lips twitched as if to intervene, but he chose silence. Later, in the drawing room, Celestine settled easily beside him on the settee, regaling him with tales of London's society. Serafina lingered by the fire. Watching it struck her then how ill-suited she was to this world. She was only a wagered token, while Celestine, glittering, pedigreed, belonged naturally at his side. When Damien rose to pour wine, Serafina slipped toward the door. Mrs. Rowan intercepted her gently. "If you are weary, Miss Hale, I shall have you escorted back." Serafina nodded. Before leaving, she glanced once toward Damien. He stood beside Celestine, the picture of a polished nobleman. His eyes did not seek her. That night she lay sleepless. Celestine's laughter, her glances, her touches replaying until they burned. She told herself it should not matter. She was here only for 30 nights, yet her heart refused reason. It clenched with a pain she could neither name nor dismiss. At dawn, she fled to the gardens. Losing herself in pruning, hands scratched raw. The snip of shears drowning the noise in her mind. "You will wear yourself out," came a familiar voice. She turned. Damien stood behind her, gaze resting on her wounded hands. He seemed about to speak further when Celestine appeared along the path, silk skirts sweeping the grass. "Ah, there you are," Celestine said sweetly. "I have been looking for you. We must discuss certain matters." Damien's eyes flicked to Serafina, something unspoken in them. But at last he turned to Celestine with a nod. "Forgive me, Miss Hale." Together they departed, leaving Serafina alone among the blooming roses she had nursed back to life. Her chest constricted as though by an invisible hand. That afternoon, Isla brought her tea, hesitating. "My lady, are you well?" Serafina forced a smile. "Quite well. I have only seen certain truths more clearly." The maid lowered her eyes, though compassion lingered in them. Serafina turned to the window, to the garden now flourishing. Yet inside her, doubt grew. Perhaps she was but a shadow, and Lady Celestine the true choice. Night fell. Through the long corridors echoed Celestine's laughter, mingled with the measured steps of Damien. From the blue room, Serafina listened. Each sound struck like a blade. She knew then her battle was no longer only against captivity. It was against her own heart and the merciless truth that threatened to undo it. Time at Ravenskeep passed more swiftly than Serafina had expected. On her first night, the castle had seemed no more than a prison of stone. Yet as the 30 nights waned, she realized she had grown accustomed to the moan of wind through the towers, the pale shafts of light through narrow windows, and even the measured tread of the Marquise echoing down the corridors. Lady Celestine remained, a glittering shadow at every meal and evening gathering. Her presence pressed like a weight on the air. Damien, ever proper, treated her with courteous attention, while with Serafina he maintained an inscrutable distance, not cruel, but unwilling to let her draw closer. And so Serafina came to recognize the truth. Her time at Ravenskeep was nearly over. Yet the thought of leaving tightened her chest with a pain she dared not name. On the 26th day, she began to pack. The small valise lay open, her plain dresses folded neatly within. Isla stood nearby, her wide eyes shadowed with sorrow. Miss, will you truly return to Rosevale? Seraphina gave a faint smile. Where else could I go? The maid bowed her head and left. Alone, Seraphina sat with her mother's journal in her lap. On the faded page, the brown ink still declared, "Never let another decide your worth." She closed it with trembling hands. Mother, if only I knew which road to take. That evening, the supper was unusual. Only Damien and Seraphina sat at the long table. Lady Celestine had departed that morning, summoned by her father. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint clink of silver on porcelain. Seraphina scarcely ate, her thoughts a storm. At last, when the servants withdrew, Damien spoke. Lady Celestine will not return. Seraphina lifted her eyes, steady though her pulse leaped. I assume you found the match unsuitable? Her father sought an alliance of power. I could not accept it. You told me once you required a sensible marriage, Seraphina said, her tone even. He paused, then shook his head. Perhaps I was wrong to believe marriage should be built only on reason. Her heart clenched, but she betrayed nothing. She laid her napkin down and murmured, a pity. A marriage of reason might be far safer than anything else. Damien's gaze lingered, piercing, as if he longed to cross the space between them. But he only inclined his head as though swallowing words unsaid. On the 28th day, rain swept the cliffs. Seraphina wandered the corridors instead of the garden, pausing at the library door. Inside, Damien sat amidst piles of papers. He looked up, startled. Do you require something? No, she said softly. Only one last look. I will leave in 2 days. Slowly, Damien rose and crossed the room. He stopped before her, his gray eyes clouded with what he could not say. You would return to Rosevale, to a father still drowning in wine and debt. And where would you have me go instead? She asked, voice trembling yet proud. His hand clenched, then loosened. I could arrange something. A different path, a place not chained to that ruin. She gave a low laugh. What are you offering, my lord? Patronage. A role in your life. His face tightened. I only do not want you to vanish from this place. The words struck so plain, so raw, that Seraphina faltered. But she gathered herself, tilting her head. You cannot keep me. The 30 nights will end, and you know that better than anyone. Damien turned away to the rain streaking the windows, his broad back heavy with silence. Watching him, Seraphina felt both torn and strangely warmed. That night she sat by her window in the blue room, listening to the storm. She had come to Ravenskeep as a pawn. Yet now, as the bargain neared its end, she feared leaving would carve a hollow in her heart that nothing could fill. On the 29th day, she walked the garden paths she had revived, roses budding where once only weeds grew. Emotions swelled with every step. As the sun sank, Damien appeared. Not in his usual black cloak, but in a plain coat. His tall figure stretched in the damp twilight. Seraphina was the first time he spoke her name, not Miss Hale. She turned, breath stilled. What do you require? He halted before her eyes, steady, stripped of coldness. I have hidden too long. Behind walls of stone, behind the betrayal I could not face. But you have shown me I was living in a prison of my own making. Her pulse thundered. I ask you to stay, he said. Not for debt, not for duty, but because you choose to. Her body trembled. Words tangled in her throat. At last she whispered, and if I refuse? Pain flickered in his gaze, but he inclined his head. Then I will let you go. But I must speak it. I no longer want a marriage of reason. I want something real. Seraphina left the garden with her heart in tumult. Ravenskeep's gates were ready to close behind her but his confession. raw and unguarded, seared into her soul like fire that could not be extinguished. The morning of the 29th day dawned with rare sunlight. After long days of rain, Ravenskeep seemed washed clean, its stone walls glistening with damp droplets clinging to the roses Seraphina had pruned. She stepped into the garden with a heavy heart. One more day, and all would be over. She walked the paths, fingers brushing petals, jeweled with dew. Behind her came footsteps. She did not need to turn to know. Seraphina, Damien's voice came, low. Stripped of its usual distance, she paused, drew a steady breath, then turned. He stood clad in a simple black coat, his steel-gray eyes clouded like stormed skies. Yet today, there was something else in them, not coldness, but resolve. "What do you want, my lord?" Her voice was calm, though her heart trembled. Damien stepped closer, shoes sinking in the damp grass. "I want to speak what I should have said long ago. I have been a coward, hiding behind walls of stone to avoid admitting I needed anyone. But you have changed that." Seraphine's gaze held his luminous, unwavering. "I am only a woman my father sold. You of all men know this. Koe," he said sharply, shaking his head. "You are no commodity. From the very first, I knew you were different. The way you stood before me, unflinching. The way you brought life back to these gardens. The way you filled this house with breath again." Her heart raced. She forced composure. "And what is this, then?" "A final favor before I leave." He moved nearer still, until only inches separated them. His voice dropped, roughened with urgency. "Not a favor. A plea. Stay. Not as part of a bargain, not as a prisoner, but as someone beloved." The words struck like thunder. Seraphina swayed, her knees weak. She turned her face away, hiding sudden tears. "You don't understand. I cannot believe a promise born of such corruption. Marriage, love, they must be chosen freely. I was never free." His hand lifted, halted just shy of her cheek. His voice broke.
"I know."
"That is why I am ashamed. But Seraphina, for the first time in my life, I want to try it differently. I want something true." She turned back, eyes glistening. "Do you know how often I told myself I was nothing but a stand-in? That one day Lady Celestin or some other glittering heiress would sit in my place, and I would remain a sordid memory." "No," Damien said fiercely. "No one could replace you. I let Celestine come, thinking safety lay in her. But when she sat beside me, I knew my mind, my heart, were only with you. With the woman who dared meet my eyes without fear. With the woman who saw me as a man, not the stone marquise." His voice faltered, eyes bared. "Seraphina, you have woken a heart, I thought, long dead." The wind stirred her skirts. She bit her lip, torn. She had seen him in his rawest moments when he spoke of betrayal. When grief cracked through his armor, when he stood at the window like a lost soul. And now he stood unmasked before her. "Are you saying you love me?" Her voice quivered, not saying, knowing. Damien answered, each word hammered with certainty. "I have loved you perhaps since the night you spoke the truth at my table when all others bent their heads. Perhaps since I saw you breathe life into dead roses. But now I am sure." Her heart clenched, painful yet radiant. She longed to believe, but wounds of betrayal and fear of inequality clawed at her. She stepped back. "Damien, I cannot stay only as proof of some sudden passion. I need to know you can lay down the past, that you see me as your equal, not a woman to pity." He stood silent, then suddenly dropped to one knee on the dew-soaked grass, taking her hand in his. His eyes burned, desperate, unguarded. "I ask not for pity. I ask for a chance. If you leave, I will let you go. But grant me hope that one day I may seek you, not to own you, but to stand beside you as the man you choose." Seraphine's throat tightened. the proud, impenetrable marquise now knelt in the garden she had revived. Her heart could not help but waver. She bent, her palm brushing his cheek. "Damien, if I choose to stay, it will not be for debts, not for duty, but because I want to." He held his breath, waiting. But she only gave a sad, tender smile and whispered, "Tomorrow you will have my answer." As she left, Damien remained kneeling, his shadow etched against the wet grass, framed by the red-gold blaze of sunset. His heart burned with both despair and hope. The 30th day approached, and with it the fate of them both. Dawn of the 30th day. The first light streamed through the tall windows of Ravenskeep, gilding the gray stone walls in amber warmth. Seraphina stood at the casement of the blue room, watching the sun rise above the forested horizon. Beside the bed, her small valise lay packed and ready. She knew today was the day of decision. Isla dressed her in the plain blue gown, the very one she had worn on her first day within Ravenskeep. As though the circle had closed, she would depart as she had come, unadorned. Without illusion, when the ancient clock in the great hall tolled 8, Mrs. Rowan knocked at her door. "Miss Hale, the marquise awaits you in the hall." Seraphina nodded, steadying her breath. The great hall blazed with more candles than usual, flames casting golden halos upon the ancestral portraits. Damien Ravenscroft stood beneath one such canvas, tall, solemn, the light carving hard planes of his face. In his hand lay a sheaf of papers bound by a red ribbon. When Seraphina descended the staircase, he lifted his gaze. Their eyes met silver gray to storm blue deep, pleading, yet calm. "Seraphina," he said, his voice rich and low. "I've been waiting." She halted before him, spine straight. "The bargain ends today. I will leave Ravenskeep." Damien inclined his head, then raised the papers. "This is the contract your father signed, binding you here for 30 nights. Today, before you, I tear it apart." With steady hands, he ripped the sheaf in two. Fragments fluttered to the cold stone floor, their tearing echo ringing like a benediction of freedom. Seraphine's breath caught, her heart constricting. "You are free," Damien said hoarsely. "No more bargains. No more debts. But before you go, I must ask, may I pursue you openly, with respect, as a man asks for the love of a woman?" She searched his face. No longer the icy lord, no longer the feared stone Marcus, only a man. Scarred, fractured, yet striving to open his heart. "You say you would let me go if I chose to," she whispered. "Then, if I walk away, what will you do?" He drew a deep breath, unwavering. "I will let you go, but I will not cease proving that my love is neither whim nor penance. I will find you wherever you choose to belong." Seraphina stooped, lifting a torn scrap of parchment, her fingers trembling. "You once purchased me with my father's wager, but I will not let my love be written on paper." Damien clenched his fists, silent, waiting. She raised her chin, voice firm. "If I remain, it will be my choice. Not for duty, not for pity, but because I wish to begin anew beside you as equals." A silence fell. Then Damien's lips trembled as if hearing salvation. "Seraphina, will you stay?" She gave the smallest nod. "I will, not as a prisoner, but as Seraphina Health-a-Woman who will write Ravenskeep's new story with Damien Ravenscroft." He stepped forward, his hands closing around hers, sure and warm at last. No fear, no chains, only truth laid bare between them, "I swear," Damien said, voice thick yet resolute. "From this day no ghost shall bind me. I will rebuild this place with you, and if you permit, I would call you my wife." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but a smile curved her lips. "Then let us begin again, not from a wager, but from the garden we brought back to life." 1 year later, Ravenskeep was no longer a fortress of chill and shadow. The rose gardens flourished in radiant bloom, the pride of the valley. In the eastern wing, a small school had opened where poor girls learned to read, to play music, to keep accounts. Lessons once reserved for the nobility Seraphina. Now Lady Ravenscroft sat in the library, sorting through letters of application. A simple gold band gleamed upon her hand, symbol of a love that required no display. Damien entered, tall as ever, but with a smile that had grown familiar. He set a stack of books upon the desk, then pressed a tender kiss to her hair. More petitions for admission. Seraphina asked softly, "We may need more classrooms." "Do whatever your heart desires," Damien replied. "I will see to the rest." They exchanged a glance, trust shining between them. In the garden, young students laughed as they learned a new song. Wind stirred the roses, sending fragrance through Ravenskeep's halls. Seraphina clasped Damien's hand, whispering, "Who would have believed that from a shameful wager could bloom a true love?" Damien smiled, tightening his hold. "The only wagers worth making, Seraphina, are those where both emerge victorious." Above them, the church bells tolled across a clear blue sky. And within the hearts of two once broken souls, a true beginning had been written, equal, steadfast, and free from shadow.